Soccer Wise with Davi D'Costa and Tom Boger. Welcome to all our wise asses out there ready to hear a preview of the Portland Timbers. For so long, it was straightforward. Timbers, you're talking MLS Cup expectations. You're talking about some of the big names in the league. You're talking about some of the staples of the league. Diego Valeri, Diego Chara, Liam Ridgewell. All these pieces you knew would be there year after year and come back and have success. And we are into a different era now for this club. Year 2 under Phil Neville. The Evander drama was a lot of this year. And Tom, we pushed this one off because we were waiting for the moves to finish. But I also pushed this one off because it's one of the teams that I feel least sure about right now going into the season. And like I'm saying, that is unusual for the Portland Timbers.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I'd push back a little to say that they have transitioned through eras before. They passed the torch from Diego Valeri to Sebastian Blanco when Valeri was still on the team before he left for Lanús and eventually retired. So they've tweaked again. It's not a lot of the same pieces. Guess what? Diego Chara is still here. I'm just assuming he's going to play till he's 48. I love that dude. I hope that he never retires. But this is definitely a new era because Evander was supposed to take the torch from Sebastian Blanco, and he did. And then things went sideways between his camp and the front office and the club. And now he's in Cincinnati. And Davi D'Costa is in as the DP10, but he can play on the wing. He can play a little bit deeper. They're going to be different. There is no like-for-like replacement for Evander, or nothing realistic to say, hey, go have, 34 goal contributions and be an MVP finalist. That's not fair to Davi D'Costa. He will be a different player. I don't think he'll score the same number of goals, but he can do the same creativity, and they believe he's going to do more off the ball and give them more flexibility against the ball. This team, I'm not worried about them putting up goals, even without Evander. I think that there's enough in this attack, both in terms of goal scorers and chance creators, that what they need to fix is their defensive unit. And if they think that can start with the DP number 10, if that's the kind of guy that sets the tone, like a Nico Lodero, that dude never stopped running for Seattle. That, like, in addition to how he attacked off the ball, he was just incredible. And if you see your DP working that hard, if you're the left back, if you're the center mid, if you're a homegrown, man, you're running too. So there's the pathway to that. It's going to be really difficult without Evander, but I'm not worried about this team's attack. My only questions are in defense.
It is a team that will obviously always have the advantage of home field and that setup, that atmosphere, although it did not work for them in the playoffs. That's like, Tom, it kind of goes under the radar, I think, because it was so early in the postseason and was so bizarre and that Vancouver couldn't host and all of that. But that's like an all-time performance. To lose like that in a home playoff game is one of those that potentially sticks with you for a while.
No, for sure, and I guess like the drama around Evander has helped. Like That's been the talking point all offseason. If this was stable, if he was staying with the club, if there was no headlines off the field for that, this is probably what we'd be talking about more. Yeah, it was a complete disaster, huge disappointment, and the wheels just completely fell off. How do they fix that? What do they do moving forward? Like, again, that's obviously not a result that's going to happen all the time, but in a playoff game, that's going to be remembered, and they're going to have to deal with that until they get back to the playoffs. If they make the playoffs this year, if they make the wild card game this year, we'll be talking about it the whole time, that it's time for them to get it right or get it back, and those fears are going to be there. So, again, that's why I'm more worried about the defense than losing Evander, because like there's a lot of the same group that's back. They've added Joao Ortiz, they've added Jimmer Foray, and like Finn Sermon is somebody that they have a lot of hopes in, but again, like, a lot of the same pieces are back, and I like a lot of them, so I think it's more on Phil Neville and the coaching staff to tweak the game model, tweak the system to be a little bit more responsible defensively and maybe cut out some of the turnovers that lead to defensive transition moments.
This is a team that I would like to see in the cash for space conversation for the Atencios and Cu-DiPietros of the world, and I get that they've hit really well on their U22s, so maybe not at that level, but basically saying if you're not going to produce academy players, why not go buy homegrowns from other teams that have an excess of it? And the numbers on those cashers may not be very high, but it might be a way for you to fill in the back end of your roster a little bit more and change things a little bit if you don't want to go huge and sign a DP from another team. And they've done well to go outside the league and sign the big name players, Jonathan Rodriguez, Evander, and I think D'Costa as well, start to all fit in line with what you want to do. It goes without saying, anyone out there who's not a Portland fan listening, if you've never been, it's a must in Major League Soccer to attend. Even when I stay in East Portland and you come back across the river, I'll bike or take a scooter over the river. It's just
fit, bro.
The whole thing's amazing. I don't know that fitness is what I would
Well,
call
I was already committed to that joke, and then you said scooter, and I went, damn it, this doesn't fit. But I already got it loaded up that I'm going to stop your
cool.
very nice soliloquy, and I'm going to get the joke in anyway.
But the whole, like, European setup, stadium inside the city, all that type of stuff. Like, Portland is the real one. It's not even an NFL stadium inside of it. Like, you are in city, and you turn to your right, and the stadium is sort of dug down into the ground. So it sits right there. The streetcar runs right past it. There are, bars and restaurants all around it. You see green everywhere. Thorns games as well, like an elite atmosphere, maybe the best in NWSL. So it is a must attend for anyone. I was there for the 2021 MLS Cup, and it was like a noon kickoff, and it was raining and foggy, and it was just this crazy experience. Like, up at 5 a.m. to get to the stadium, and people were in line all night that I had a chance to sort of chat with and hang out with throughout the night. We sort of filmed segments with people who had been there for 4 or 5 days for general admission, their bans for sitting inside Timbers Army, and when you're able to access the stadium. And then just this like glow inside the building was epic. And then, of course, Felipe Mora's goal was absolutely wild. They didn't end up winning, so it would be cool to experience Portland Timbers victory inside of Portland. But either way, it's one of the must experiences in Major League Soccer. And if they are competitive this year, hopefully we make our way out there. But either way, if you want to follow things both in Portland and across Cascadia, Cascadia FC is your spot to do it. Jeremy, the Portland writer on the ground, joins us right now for our segment about this team. All right, well, we have rolled through the dominoes so far. We've talked FC Cincinnati. Now that the moves have been made, we've talked FC Dallas, but we had yet to preview the Portland Timbers as we were waiting for all of this to finish and finally come back around to what is one of the big clubs in the league, but sits in a very odd place right now. And to do so, we've got someone on the ground. We've got Jeremy here from Cascadia FC on Substack. Read all of his work. Follow him on Blue Sky. Follow him on social media as well for all of your Timbers coverage. And Jeremy, it's been a long off season, I would imagine.
It has been a long off season, and for many of us, we're still in disbelief that the first game of the season is 5 days away. But
amazingly, no CONCACAF competition, so it could be today, actually, if you don't have snow. And potentially for some of these teams, it is right around the corner. Clearly did not all go exactly as planned, starting with Evander deciding that he didn't want to play in Portland anymore at the end of last season. Let's start there. Then we'll run through the rest of our transfer window. We will get into our Doyalism and get his words on the squad that we will bounce off of. And then we've got Andrew Weeby's over-under as well to finish on. Take me through your experience covering this Evander story, watching the ebbs and flows of it, and then sort of the waiting game at the end.
Well, for me, the Evander story begins when he first showed up at the start of 2023. And there were already questions, mostly from the fans, about how well is he actually going to commit to being here and whether or not we're going to see that kind of effort and commitment on the field. In 2023, however, because of various different reasons, it's his first season in the league. Someone has recently made a theory about the players who might take a year to settle and how year two is their real breakout. But in year one, it very much was a settling year for him. And it was made even tougher by the firing of head coach Giovanni Savarese in August and then finishing the season with an interim. But while interim Miles Joseph was in charge, Evander actually began to play some of his best soccer of the season. And it wasn't enough to get the Timbers in the playoffs, but you could see throughout the progression of the season, he's getting better, he's getting more comfortable, and a lot of us were excited for year two. And then year two, before the season even starts, there's already rumors flying around about how, Flamengo might be coming in for him, and other smoke surrounding that. Nothing did happen. He started the season with the team, missed the first 2 games due to injury, and then in his first game of 2024, scores what I would consider the Timbers 2024 goal of the season, a long shot that was entirely speculative, but wasn't speculative at all because he knew he could score, and he beat NYCFC 2-1 at Yankee Stadium. So I feel like that was the introduction to what ended up being a historic year for him. And throughout all of this, all of the games, all the months passing by, most of us in Portland were saying, why isn't he getting as much respect for MVP consideration as he continued to be towards the top of the list in combined goal contributions? And then in late August, it was late August, early September, a guitar offer came in. And this happened around the same time that the Timbers were desperately trying to sign him to a contract extension. And this is where it gets really complicated, because the terms of the extension, what I've been told, were very fair. It's what I've been told, what has also been reported. But the real disagreement came over a release clause. Now, Evander did not sign that contract extension. And from what I've heard from various people within the club is that it took a lot out of him. And he kind of started to quiet quit in a way as the season went on, especially towards that final stretch towards the playoffs. And then everyone knows what happened after the Vancouver game. And for us, at least most of the fans, it was a really big surprise to see him come out so publicly right after that. And it was our first indication that there was something wrong. We assumed when we saw the reports of the contract extension that it was only a matter of time before it got done, especially at the figures that we'd been hearing. Will have been a really healthy pay raise. So to hear that there was this much discontent and this much outrage on both sides, it really was a bit shocking. And then having it drag on, the will he come back, will he not come back for the entire rest of the offseason, knowing that in his words, he most desired to move to Brazil. We were just keeping our eyes out. Are any Brazil offers going to come in? None did. And the team that came in, Cincinnati, offered what I would say is a pretty fair price. And at that point, you want guys who are going to be on the team, as Max Crepeau said at the beginning of January. And he left. And immediately after that, Davi D'Costa comes in. So while you're looking back at the full 2 years that he's been here, you can't deny that he's arguably one of the most talented players ever to play for this club. I think he holds the best singular season by a player in Timbers MLS history. I'd put him above what Diego Valeri did in 2017. But at the same time, if he doesn't want to be here, the right move is to move him on. And he had enough value after that season that the front office decided we can absolutely sell him now, and we can bring in a player who is more interested in the project that we're building.
There's a lot of fascinating twists and turns to this. The biggest one being all of a sudden Major League Soccer institutes a new rule that didn't exist for the ability for a player like this to stay in the league. Like, there just would never be a conversation in the past of it could come back to haunt you, or even that you have to follow and watch them every day, right? I was just on a show with someone and we looked up Shaqiri's numbers. He's killing it in Switzerland. It doesn't really matter to the Chicago Fire. Like, it doesn't fully affect them. And it's Eastern Conference. It's not 100% like for like, but Evander will continue to be a part of the sphere that the Portland Timbers operate in, which never in the past would have been the case. And so that then becomes this whole wild piece at the end of this that we've just never really experienced before. And as you said, it has been this 2-year span. I tell this story all the time of watching that Galaxy game where he puts up the hat trick, and I thought he wasn't celebrating because he was like just so done with the Galaxy being so bad against him. And it turned out he was unhappy, like you said, quiet quitting. Like, that was his quiet quitting, by the way, was still being the best player on the field and still putting up crazy numbers. But it clearly hurt the team. And you see the, implosion against Vancouver Whitecaps at the end, and the hope has to be that the sum of the parts and the happier locker room and all those things can make up for what you're losing and take you a step further, because even last year, it wasn't the finish that the Portland Timbers expect, that Timbers fans expect, that the club expects. And as you said, the replacement has been Davi D'Costa to come in, a Portuguese attacking player coming in from Ligue 1. The unfortunate part of the timeline of this whole thing is he's the only one who needs to get a visa, and so they are probably the Portland Timbers behind the other two clubs in Cincinnati and Dallas in getting him ready, getting him on the field, getting him to be a cohesive part of this team. But so far from what you've heard and what you've seen, what is D'Costa? What's the expectations around him, and what will he be for the Portland Timbers?
I immediately have sympathy for this guy. And it's because he's immediately going to be compared to the guy that came before him. And the guy who came before him had the best single individual season in Timbers MLS history. But this is where I've asked to temper the expectations a little bit. His impact might not be felt fully in the goal involvements that the Timbers are losing out on. But I think, based on the tape that I've watched, and I've watched a lot of his tape over the past month when it became clear that this is who the Timbers are going to get, he is going to offer different dimensions to this team than Evander did. Now, I think he's going to make them more dangerous on the counterattack. I think he's going to make them more dangerous when they're trying to defend from the front. And I think that he's just going to add more pace, more dynamism, and he really likes through balls. He's a very, very good passer, specifically getting those balls forward. He's a player who will receive the ball in the middle of the pitch, and he's immediately going to look straight up the field and wonder, who can I move this onto? And sometimes under Evander, he'd take a couple of touches, wait for the team to catch up to him. But now, when you have players like Jonathan Rodriguez, who's a very good free runner, you have Anthony, you have Ariel Lassiter, who I think is actually going to play a bigger role than a lot of people expect this year. When you have a player like that who can just immediately turn a ball from a ball into his feet into an immediate counterattack, that's going to be really exciting. But the question is, once again, how quickly is he going to be able to gel? How quickly is he going to get on the same page as his teammates? It took Evander about a year to do that. And that was Evander who'd had experience moving from club to club throughout his career. This is Davi D'Costa's second ever team that he's played for. He moved to France when he was 9 years old, and now he's about to move to an entirely different country 15 years later, and he's not going to be living in the same city. He's not going to have the same surroundings. So just getting him well adjusted on the field and off the field is going to be really, really important. And based on what I've heard from the team, they are doing their best to make sure he not only gets adapted quickly, but they're doing it correctly as well. They're not trying to rush him.
Yeah, Evander was in a easier spot in that he'd moved from Brazil to Norway or Denmark, whatever it was. So moving to Portland was another experience for him. And as you said, it's a huge jump. What you talked about in terms of the style of player he is makes a lot of sense. You can't replace Evander. So what you have to do now is to try and tweak the whole thing to make it fit a little bit better. Having a player in that position who maybe can help you control the game more rather than score goals makes a lot of sense. Being able to cover more ground, being more dangerous in transition. And then the one advantage that D'Costa has that Evander didn't was Jonathan Rodriguez is already established. And he showed last year that he can be the best player on the field for a winning team in games. But I think one of the fascinating things with Evander is you talked about the MVP consideration and was it there or wasn't. It's a team that finished ninth in the Western Conference, and he put up those numbers. So there was somewhat of a disconnect between the way he plays and the overall performance of a full team. It's not fully his fault. Soccer's a large game, but in MLS, you have, because of DPs and roster sizes and all of that, you have outsized responsibility as a designated player. It'll be interesting to see how D'Costa, as a younger player, is able to fit into that role, but also do so alongside some pretty big names. And Jonathan Rodriguez, Felipe Mora, Kevin Kelsey now, Santi Moreno, Anthony. There's a lot of options with this team. There's a lot to like. And D'Costa is going to be must-watch, I think, early in the season to see what he's like and how he's fitting in and what his experience is. He's not the only piece coming in. You mentioned Ariel Lassiter as a free agent, a guy Phil Neville's already coached. We've seen him play as a wingback. We've seen him play as a fullback and as a winger. I agree with you. I think he could be a really nice piece for this squad. Joao Ortiz, the other big pickup in central midfield from Independiente del Valle, and in his prime, Ecuadorian international. And then Kelvin Kelsey, the U22 pickup from Shakhtar Donetsk, who we saw a little bit last year with FC Cincinnati. What do you make of this window overall and what this club was trying to do and whether or not they accomplished it?
This might be my favorite Timbers transfer window in recent memory. And the reason why isn't because of who they brought in. It's what profile those players offer. And every player that they've brought in, you can point to one thing that the team struggled with last year, and you can say this player is going to help with that. Like, let's start with Joao Ortiz because he's one of my guys this year. He is someone who I think is going to massively improve this team because he's 28 years old, and based on all the highlight tape I've watched of him, he's rapid. He runs from corner to corner, box to box, just covering ground and trying to win the ball. That's my favorite genre of player because I've been spoiled by watching Diego Chara for 15 years now. So I think that the addition of Ortiz will lessen the pressure on Chara as he enters year number 39, which still insane to me that he is 39 years old and he's still going to play significant minutes, and that he's kept himself in such good shape to be able to handle the rigors of an MLS season that keeps expanding and getting tougher and tougher. So Ortiz's addition is huge. Getting him on a TAM deal is also really good for the team's salary cap, because you could make the argument that getting a designated player at that role would be very important, but bringing him over on a contract that isn't going to take up such a necessary roster spot and such a huge roster spot is really good business by the club. Kelsey is the most intriguing one to me, from not what he's going to do this year, but what they're expecting for him in the future. He signed a very long contract when he arrived, and he's also a profile the Timbers were desperately missing last year. And that is just a big guy up top who can win aerial duels, and also can gain chemistry and has a record of playing in this league and being able to score some goals. Because last year as a 19-year-old, he scored 6 goals. That's pretty impressive for a 19-year-old who came over without a preseason. Right. Now he's been here. He's had a full preseason with the team. And I'm really interested to see not how he starts out, but how he finishes the year. I really like the addition of him, and it fills another need that the Timbers have. One player who you did not mention is Himer Fori. And he might be the guy who I'm the most excited about, because he's 6'2" and he plays left back, and he can win a lot of balls in the air. The Timbers, I don't think I need to remind you of this, they conceded 12 set-piece goals last year, which was tied for the Galaxy for the most in the league. And he's going to be a huge addition to help with that area of defending, which I think is the most important thing they need to fix heading into this year. But he's also very good at getting forward. He can deliver really good crosses from the left side, and he provides competition for Claudio Bravo, who hasn't had that level of competition since he became a Timber in 2021. So even though it's a lot of what you'd call depth signings, none of these players are going to be expected to start right away, but they will have the opportunity to make their way into the starting 11. And if they're good enough to if they're good enough to make that starting 11, they should be able to perform well on the pitch.
Yeah, all of it makes a lot of sense. It feels like a lot of holes, as you said, being filled. It feels like optionality, the ability for Phil Neville to maybe change things as they go. Really, all we saw last year was the Kamal Miller move to left back, and that was kind of it, because there wasn't really depth to make a lot of changes in these other positions. It also feels big on the Kelsey signing, and it's one of the things me and Tom debated, where he was higher on this signing than I am. And I think if you're making the argument you're making, which is for the next 5 years he could be a good player, that's great. I don't know what he is this year, but the idea is you're probably not going to get another full Felipe Mora healthy year. It just hasn't been his track record. So having Kelsey as an option, or having Ariel Lassiter and being able to play Jonathan Rodriguez in there, it gives you a few different options. Didn't feel like they had last year. And part of that is because the other side of this transfer window, outside of Evander, they haven't really lost a true contributor. Eric Williamson was traded to Charlotte, has still dealt with those injuries. We're hoping he can get his career started there, but that's not a loss from 2024 for the Portland Timbers. And the other names I have down here, Marvin Laria, Mason Toy, Tega Ibakoba, none of them were really contributors to this team last year. And so you have, outside of Evander, no other losses, and you've brought in 4 or 5 impact pieces, maybe 2 or 3 starters. It feels like a really good offseason for this team. They will play in Leagues Cup and U.S. Open Cup this season. So that is the 2 competitions, cup competitions for Portland, the max, of course, that MLS teams can play in. Let's go to our Doyalism right now, and then we'll chat off the back of that.
The bullish case for the Timbers in 2025 is that they actually should have been better in 2024. They did a good job of limiting the quality of opposing chances. They just had kind of disastrous goalkeeping. And those guys, Maxime Crepeau in particular, should be better in 2025. So you could see real improvement right there from a team that gave up almost 60 goals and, of course, got crushed 5-dick in the playoffs. Like that was just an absolute no-show from everyone on that team. And that leads to the bearish case for the Timbers is that by the end of last season, um, we'll call it the team spirit was not good. And in large part, that's because Evander, who was the best player on the team, was just like catastrophically unhappy with everything about the Timbers, but most especially the front office. Now Evander is gone, replaced by Portuguese attacker David D'Costa, and it's just hard to imagine David D'Costa will be as good as Evander was. Like Evander was incredible last year, MVP caliber, 15 goals and 15 assists. It is just going to be really, really hard to replace that with one guy. And then the other aspect of it is that Evander, Jonathan Rodriguez, and Felipe Mora, the three DPs together, combined for something like 70 goal contributions. And like that was far and away the best in the league that carried the team, the three DPs. One of those guys is gone, one of those guys is hurt, and the third of those guys is old. And there just hasn't been enough brought in to make up for that. So I lean slightly towards the bearish case for this team. It's hard to imagine they'll be much better than last year. I think it's a little bit likely they'll be a little bit worse. Like not totally out of the picture, 30 points or something, but 50 does seem like a bit of a stretch.
So Doyle talked himself back and forth over that line in both directions, ended up under the line, ended up, I think, a little bit against what the potential is this season. I think talked about some of the concerns we mentioned. Let's talk defensively. Like that has been the huge Achilles heel for this team. Basically, it's why Gio ended up getting fired, because the strengths of their teams, even with Valeri and Blanco and all of that, were defensive spine when they made MLS Cup runs and deep playoff runs, and they have not been able to find that again. What do you make of what this team can be this year?
Well, the defense, I like his point about the goalkeeping, because Maxime Crepeau was brought in to be the number one. James Pantemis performed pretty well in his limited starts and ended the season as the number one. But that also goes to the whole overarching theme of the defense, which is consistency, and specifically consistency in player selection. Now, the Timbers probably had the deepest center back room in MLS last year. They were 5 deep, and then they lost Larry Smabiala, and then they brought in Finn Sermon to replace him. And throughout the 37 games they played across MLS and Leagues Cup, they started 20 different back lines with goalkeeper pairings. So that's 20 different over 37 games. The unit that had the most starts in that was 5. And it wasn't even on paper their best defensive unit of Claudio Bravo, Kamal Miller, Dario Zuparic, Juan David Mosquera, and Crepeau in goal. So I think the number one thing they have to focus on this year is establishing that first choice center back pairing, figuring out who the first choice defenders are going to be outside of that. That includes the goalkeeper. There is a strong case for James Pantemis, but it's still Maxime Crepeau's job as far as I'm concerned. Even though Crepeau, his post-shot expected goal differential was among the worst in the league, while Pantemis was in the positive, I think it's very interesting that Pantemis was actually better at keeping the shots out, even though I think Crepeau exemplifies more of what Neville wants his goalkeepers to do. And the other parts of the defense that really need to be improved are specifically set pieces, which I've already touched on. I think they're woefully out of position on defensive transitions. They tend to turn the ball over high up the field with their fullbacks really high up, and all of a sudden it's an onrush at 2 center backs who have to make quick decisions as to who they're going to cover, and usually that's going to leave one player open. And then the final one is shots from distance, because for some reason they're very good at protecting the box. They aren't very good at challenging opposition shots from defense. And I think if they can improve on all 3 of those and they can establish consistency there, I think this team's ceiling gets raised significantly. However, I'm not expecting that kind of drastic improvement over one offseason. I'm expecting the set pieces to be a lot better next year. The defensive transition, that's going to come with more minutes for the midfielders and more consistency. And then the shots from distance, sometimes you just allow a banger goal every once in a while. It happens. This is MLS where great goals come weekly. But I think the most important thing is finding that consistency and being able to defend set pieces. And I think that will raise their ceiling more than Evander if he had stayed, or D'Costa putting up a season equivalent to what Evander did last year.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons behind all of this, and I think you laid it out perfectly in all of that. I think one of my concerns is that deep center back pool. I'm not sure that there are two that I would love to be starters in Major League Soccer. I think there's one in Kamal Miller, and I think there's four that are legitimately depth pieces on an MLS roster. I'm not sure that's a second great starter, and I think that maybe limits some of what this team can do. And I know people in Portland are very high on Finn Sermon and what he can be. It feels like a lot of responsibility for a young center back, but if he's good enough, great. I think for me, I've seen Zuparic enough where I'm not going to say that's a starting MLS Cup center back. And especially when you look at a club that had Luis Mabiala and had Liam Ridgewell and has had these players in that position in big moments where you know what that ceiling can be and what that responsibility is. But it feels like a lot of the other stuff, as you said, can be cleaned up. The set piece, obvious. João Ortiz, hope being, helps clean up some of the defensive transition stuff, the ground coverage stuff. And I think part of D'Costa being a more consistent possession player rather than a flair piece centrally like Evander is you can hopefully anticipate turnovers more often. You can be in better positions when the ball gets turned over. Every coaching staff calls it different, whether it's offensive marking or passive defending, whatever it is. It's the positioning you take up while you're in possession in anticipation of losing the ball. It takes a second to adjust into those spots, and I think Portland was one of those teams where you had so much 1v1 talent that people weren't really in those positions, or Juan Mosquera and Claudio Brava, they don't really care about those positions, and it's not really their focus when they're on the field. So all of it, I think you're right, could take a step forward, and if that's the case, even if you have that drop in the attack, you're probably somewhat similar to where you finished last year. One thing before I take us to our over-under, which is I think the turf at Providence Park leads to bangers. This is just like pure speculation. It just feels like we've seen so many absurd long strikes, and I've called games for it, and like Open Cup all the way through to MLS. So I'm throwing that theory out there. I would love for Portland to do the research themselves because they own the stadium, and then they could tell us whether or not that's true. But Andrew Weeby's over-under for us goes into this point, which is Portland's place in the Western Conference, standings at 9.5 over or under. Last year they finished in 9th. That is the final play-in spot for the playoffs. And then Vancouver had a motocross race or something, so they ended up getting to host and losing by a lot of goals at home. So 9.5 under means they're out of the playoffs. Over means they're in. Do you think this team is as good or better than they were last year? And what do you make of this line?
I think rather than getting better at scoring goals this year, they didn't need to do that. And a natural regression was probably going to happen, even if Evander had stayed. So I think what they did with the offseason in their transfer business, they raised the floor of this team a bit. They added more competition at crucial positions. And also in preseason, Phil Neville has been experimenting with a back three. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag so far, but it's something that he is willing to try. And a lot of people, myself included, feel that the players on this roster would suit a system with 3 center backs and 2 wing backs and whatever combination of forwards you want. There's a lot of players on this team that can thrive in multiple different systems, not just the 4-2-3-1. So I'm going to take the over on that. I think they will find a way to make it into the playoffs because Providence Park is a very tough place to play. And I'm betting on that defensive solidity to come back.
Yeah.
Because I believe with 3 center backs, that's better for set pieces. It's better for the team being able to defend transitions with an extra man back there. And I'm also just more bought in on DaCosta improving this team out of possession with a bunch of players who I think are willing to defend from the front, like Felipe Mora and especially Santiago Moreno. Despite putting up double-digit assists last year, Moreno's defensive work was the thing that stood out to me more than anything. He is not afraid to get stuck in there and try and win the ball back. And some of those high turnovers that he forced ended up allowing Evander to pad his stats by getting more goals and assists.
Yeah.
So if the team can be more bought in to defending not just with their defense and defending with their whole team, and if DaCosta is able to come in and provide something that draws players to him, similar to the way that Evander does, which will open up space for the other attackers, I think they will be able to climb above 9th place. When I predicted the West, I put them in 6th. I previously had them in 9th, but I was looking. I didn't realize Houston had lost Mikael, which caused me to reshuffle the entire West again. And it came out to 6th, and I felt pretty confident with that. Because this team, even if they start slow, which they're very, very prone to do, they do have 3 home games in their first 5 games, so that's a really good launching point for them to potentially take some momentum into May and June. I really think that with the defense improved, maybe they don't score as many goals, but they win a lot more games by a score of 2-1 instead of 4-2, which is better for the team.
Yeah. I came into this show probably going under this. You have talked me back through it, which shows how unsolid all of my thoughts are at this point of the season. MLS preseason is one of the scariest moments in my life every single year. Do I trust the grainy stream that I just watched, the Coachella game that cut out every 30 seconds that I just watched, or not? I think there are a lot of questions with this group. I am going to look at last year and choose to believe that the tank in form, right, the last 5 games of the year, no wins, 4 ties for this team. You talk about clearly what was going on behind the scenes with Evander, what was going on with this team. You take that away, and the form they were on the rest of the year puts them above this line. I think you're right that they're deeper. I think they're more athletic. I think they're a little bit younger. I think they're more versatile. I still have questions overall defensively, but we're talking about 7th or 8th in the Western Conference. Those are still bad defensive teams. Overall, when you talk about Major League Soccer, they're just potentially less bad than they were last year. And so I think I'm sold on a lot of what you said. I still have no idea what my standings look like, but I'm going to go under with this one as well, and that they are in the playoffs this year. Whatever it is, make sure to follow Jeremy for coverage of this team. It's going to be fascinating to watch as DaCosta gets settled in another year under Phil Neville. And, of course, it's always eventful around Portland when you get into this soccer time of season. I appreciate you taking the time to join me, and let's do this again soon.
Yep, I agree. And also, one last note. It is their 50th anniversary season for the club being founded in 1975. And if I was to say for one personal goal I would have for this team this year, win the U.S. Open Cup. They have never done it. They are one of the stronger teams in the competition. And I think that if Phil Neville dedicates a significant amount of effort to winning that competition, they will be able to do it. And being able to do that in year number 50 would be fantastic.
Yeah, it'll be wild. There's a few NASL teams, I think, that are hitting that number. I know the Tampa Bay Rowdies are there as well. It would be awesome to see it played at Providence Park. It would be the perfect atmosphere for a U.S. Open Cup big match, whether it's a semifinal or a final. And as you said, for anyone who doesn't remember, none of the teams in the U.S. Open Cup from an MLS point of view, because there's only 16 of them, were playoff teams from last year except for 2 or 3. So the Portland Timbers come in as one of those few, and they come in as one of the early favorites in that competition. And if you choose to take it seriously, there's some real potential to make a deep run. So that would be really fun to watch. I hope it's the case. Either way, we'll continue to talk about it here at SoccerWise. You can follow Jeremy for all your coverage. And